Hello Internet, I'm the Disney Brain, and we've talked a lot about Rangers and the seasons thereof as they're presented to us. But for this video, I wanted to shift focus and discuss a hypothetical scenario that will ideally get everyone involved since, let's be honest here, we've all thought about this question at some point before. So, what do I mean by best team? Well, that term can mean a lot of things, but for me, it's primarily about cohesion and how effectively the team operates together given who the members are. But for you, it can mean something else entirely. So, here's how it'll work. All of you have the choice of every ranger ever, and that includes gray area non-ranger characters like Robo Knight, assuming you feel so inclined to choose him. And, to keep things simple, you've got 6 ranger slots to work with. Also, to keep things mostly novel character dynamic wise, let's limit ourselves to 1 ranger per season. Another point to mention is this. If you choose Kira, for example, she doesn't have to be the Yellow Ranger of your team. In the same vein, if you choose someone like Leo, he doesn't have to lead your team either. Heck, if you really wanted to, you could make your team 6 former Blue Rangers. If we're gonna get creative with the team itself, might as well get creative with the roles, assuming you want to. Now, I'll give my own response, and hopefully that'll help all of you better organize your own thoughts for your team. For me, I'm looking at possible character dynamics, but also thinking about the kind of team that I'd want to watch, as opposed to just a team that could get the job done easiest. So I'm looking beyond relative and somewhat arbitrary power levels to do, as I usually do on this channel, focus on the Rangers as people. And my chosen Rangers have been tasked with a very important mission, to stop RPM's Judgment Day before Corinth ever has the chance to be the last standing human city. Essentially, save the billions of lives Venjix stole before he can steal them. But this theoretical team wouldn't know about Dr. K's past yet, so they can't just keep it from ever happening like the other Judgment Day attempted to do. Let's also assume that this team does eventually inherit the RPM powers. You can choose your own mentor and villain too, I just happen to be going with Dr. K and Venjix for my example. So, in this reimagined battle for the fate of the planet, let's just say that Gem and Gemma never got hold of their ranger powers so that my team can actually have 6 participants. You might be wondering, 6 slots? 7 morphers. Hold on to that thought, because I'll get back to it. So, with my chosen team, I'll talk about why I picked the first 4, and then I'll discuss how my 6th ranger fits in before closing with my pick for leader of the team. And no, it won't be who you think, that'd be too easy. For some of the picks, the factor of timelines might be an issue, but time travel and alternate dimensions have been used repeatedly throughout the series, so let's just assume Dr. K figured it out, which honestly isn't that much of a stretch. My first pick for Operator Series Black, Bridge Carson. Every ranger is a capable fighter in their own right, so my reasons for choosing Bridge have everything to do with who he is beyond that. He'll bring with him an entertaining dynamic that I think would work well when paired with the second ranger I picked, but he'll also balance the less jovial members of this team. He's got a beautiful mind that seems off tilt at times, but consistently produces results. Venjix is a strategic villain, so on top of Bridge's overall effectiveness and aura powers, he'd be very useful as an investigator. And, not surprisingly, he'll be the one to eventually start to suspect and then figure out that Doc K created the threat. And his extrasensory abilities might make handling the extra kick of the RPM Black powers a little easier. And, just like in RPM proper, the Green Ranger this time around will also form a strong bond with the Black. Which gets into my pick for Green Ranger, Xander Bly. What's important to note here is that any version of Bridge would fit into the team I'm creating. But, with Xander, I specifically want post-overdrive Xander. Otherwise, I'd just be kind of recreating his original arc while my chosen leader slaps him around for being overly self-assured. So, instead, we get fun-loving but still responsible Xander. And yes, there will definitely be a point early on where he attempts Plan Xander. Except at one point, it actually does work, because one of Venjix's new bots has some sort of existential crisis about why she's fighting humanity. Current Xander already helped bridge gaps between the magic world and the human world, so he'd be up for handling a situation like this too, which would eventually lead to the team finding Venjix's palace later on and staging an all-out attack. Xander would already know Bridge from once a ranger, and that will create something of a brotherhood between the two. Two people that are very different, but just seem to connect by tapping into a wavelength that the rest of their team can't quite understand, but appreciate regardless. My pick for Yellow Ranger of this team is an obvious but essential one, Kendrix Morgan. In relatively limited time, Kendrix found a way to connect to everyone on her original team. The reason her sacrifice was not only the most jarring, but the most heartbreaking in a season full of them is because she really was the glue that held everyone together. It was a breaking point, ergo the drastic tone shift in the very next episode. And in a hypothetical story like this, where lives will inevitably be lost because it's Venjix we're talking about, you absolutely need what she brings. And this will be the version of Kendrix that died and came back. So you can be sure that she'll be that much more motivated to save everyone she can, so that nobody will have to forcibly go through what she did. Once the battles start to ramp up, the team will inevitably suffer an ass-kicking worse than at times previous. We're talking about a spirit-breaking beatdown. And when that day comes, it'll be Kendrix, more so than my chosen leader, who has neither died nor experienced death as a ranger, who will be rallying the troops. Everyone at this point would be burned out, defeated, questioning why they ever came back to the hero life. But for Kendrix, dealing with those feelings would be second nature because of her journey. So through her, the team would be re-galvanized and re-energized for their fight. This team would reach their own breaking point, and when that happens, Kendrix will once again be the glue that brings them all back together. For my Blue Ranger pick, I debated between Noah and Cam since they both have a similar role, but even though I do like Cam more, I think Noah's experience fighting entire armies, as well as seeing what a world in peril looks like, helps him to better cope with and understand Venjix. Plus, it'll give Dr. K a tech-savvy ranger that can fix issues if and when she's not present, and I think since Noah is a little more like Dr. K than Flynn was, it might be easier for them to slowly connect. And then we can dig more into Noah's past, and how maybe he also felt isolated in his own way growing up, and hey, what do you know, Dr. K totally gets that. This dynamic doesn't need to be a romantic one, as it was with Dr. K and Ziggy, but adding that extra layer of connection right before the truth about her and Venjix is revealed would make that plot point hit even harder. And honestly, it would just be nice to see what Noah could do with a real story backing him, as opposed to the lazy, uninspired garbage he was in originally. Remember when I said 6 slots but 7 morphers? My Gold Ranger pick is where that all comes into play. Somewhere midway through the story, Venjix is getting more powerful. The team is still finding ways to win and save people, but just barely. Then, Bridge and Noah realize that Venjix is trying to cause havoc in multiple locations at once to separate the Rangers, and thus divide their strength. It's important here that Venjix does specifically that, because the narrative I'm presenting is coming together as people to save the world. So Venjix would employ the perfect counter to that by preventing them from teaming up as easily. This puts our resident Red Ranger in a bind until a certain pair of Silver Guardians show up. Turns out, Dr. K wanted to recruit them much sooner, but since they're fighting the spreading Venjix bots from Silver Hills, it took them longer to respond. Also important to note, the Venjix attack has long since stripped Wes and Eric of their Time Force powers. So, they meet up with Dr. K while the others are fighting, and she instructs them to help out Operator Red. They do so, but on their way, Wes's new morpher gets destroyed while saving Eric from an arid blast. Wes is in bad shape, as Eric is forcibly reminded of how these roles were once reversed. So, he goes all out with his brand new Gold Ranger powers and manages to save the Red Ranger, who knows exactly who Eric is. With Wes's injuries, he can't officially join the team. I know that given my own 1 Ranger per season rule, this might be kind of a yellow flag, but since he never morphed, I wouldn't technically consider him part of this team, in the same way that Mike was never really the Red Ranger, despite being the one to pull the Red Quasar Saber. But with Eric's power now part of the team, Venjix doesn't have nearly the same kind of advantage, and since Eric already went through his own arc, he wouldn't have to be reminded of how important the mission is this time around. But he's still Eric Myers, so he would have 1 or 2 spats with the Ranger, bringing it all home, because my pick for Red Ranger is Taylor Earhart. Who better to lead the team than a Ranger who was an active part of the Air Force, led her own team for a long time prior to Cole joining, and after the fact became more compassionate and understanding than ever before. All that while also being one of the most mature, capable, and disciplined Rangers of all time. She's demanding, she's fearless, and the only time the orgs could really challenge the Wild Force bunch pre-Red Ranger was when they upgraded their predictable strategies. Just like how Scott's military experience made him a great on-the-job shot caller in RPM proper, Taylor had even more experience in that same role prior to becoming a Ranger, and Venjix proved that you need that in the field. So, Dr. K chooses Taylor to lead the team, citing basically all the traits I just did. But The underlying reason she does it, and arguably the more resonating reason, has to do with the narrative of Wild Force. During the course of Wild Force, it becomes clear that orgs are a result of human pollution, and while that narrative isn't handled exceptionally well, it does create a situation where the Rangers, and humanity to a larger extent, are blamed for the current problem. What is Venjix? A problem created by the Doctor herself, even though the think tank is actually the bigger culprit. So, on top of being a commanding presence, on top of being a pilot, on top of having a year's worth of experience being a ranger, which includes leading the team for a good while, Dr. K picks Taylor because deep down, she thinks that Taylor will understand. And that point of connection is what helps resolve the team dilemma created once Bridge figures out the true origins of Venjix. That would serve as the last major hurdle of trust the team would have to overcome before stopping Venjix for good. The idea of Taylor being both a ranger and a soldier is critical here, because that would shape her development as a leader. In the Air Force, orders are orders and the chain of command is clear, but with rangers, the best leaders don't really see a chain of command as much, nor do they really need one. Trying to balance that natural divergence would be a constant point of pressure for Taylor, especially since post-Wild Force Taylor saw how Cole's leadership worked, so that's helping influence and modify her current approach, an approach that she is not at all used to. In line with that, she would stumble a bit at first, trying to really connect with her team. But, most importantly, there will come a point where each ranger on this team suggests something that Taylor might not completely agree with, but hears out anyways because that's just good leadership. But then, Eric's inclusion makes things complicated, and because of their shared history, as well as who they are individually, heated disagreements will be unavoidable. But eventually, they too will come to a deeper understanding as trust builds among the team pre-Dr. K reveal. This gradual development would be the major theme of this team, a team that would not start off in perfect harmony. In fact, they would have very apparent struggles with working together early on, despite all of their impressive ranger resumes. Why? Because they're not machines, and that's the whole point. But then, through their fights, through their emotional trials, they would gain synergy, achieve chemistry, and earn a shared trust among the group. Then, that trust is tested with the Dr. K reveal, forcing the Rangers to reevaluate and come to terms with everything once more before the final battle, in where they storm the Venjix Palace and stop the problem at the source. Enemy defeated, humanity salvaged, world saved. And it would be their humanity and the traits thereof that would eventually push this team past the machines in a fight they have to win. And oh yeah, Wes makes it out alright too. And those would be my picks for the Ranger team I think would be best. Along the way, I kind of got carried away and basically developed an entire season from what started off as a somewhat simple question. But hey, since several of you also wanted a video on what I do with a full Ranger season, 2 birds, 1 stone, I guess? You guys certainly don't have to go as far as I did unless you really want to, because as I mentioned, I wanted this video to be more about all of you and what your ideas for a team might look like. And I very much look forward to reading everything you guys have to say. And speaking of reading, a very hearty thank you to all of you who took some time out of your busy days to read my story, especially those of you who helped improve it. You know who you are. For those of you who still want to check it out, link down below. And for those of you who liked that story and wanted more, part 2 is up now, and things get pretty crazy. And as always, thanks for watching.